Perhaps the best way to review a remarkable novel like Rule of the Bone by Russell Banks is to compare it to two other major works of literature. First, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and second, The Odyssey by Homer. We'll take the Catcher comparison first, and catch up with Homer later. Okay, so, in a certain sense, Rule of the Bone is an implicit response to The Catcher in the Rye. For example, the title of Russell's book clearly echoes the title of Salinger's, so there's that. Also, both books are also set in New England, or at least most of Rule of the Bone is set there, so there's that as well. And perhaps most importantly, they both have teenage narrators, immature boys who live on the edges of their respective communities, and that's what really ties the two novels together. But as Banks's novel is a response and not an emulation of Salinger's, he doesn't take long to set his novel apart. Indeed, it happens in the very first sentence, as we can see clearly here. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born, and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it, if you really want to know the truth. So here we have in Holden Caulfield a narrator who is willing to hold things back, who isn't really interested in telling you the whole story, who seems almost at odds with his readers. By contrast, Chappie, aka Bone, begins his narrative like so. You'll probably think I'm making a lot of this up just to make me sound better than I really am, or smarter, or luckier, but I'm not. Here again we have a narrator who is at odds with his readers, but for a very different reason. Unlike Holden, who just doesn't want to waste his own time giving the reader what he or she may want to hear, because it just doesn't interest him, Bone implies that he's willing to tell you everything, but he's not really sure that you'll believe him. In other words, Holden is closed off and guarded, while Bone is willing to bare his soul at the risk of sounding like a liar. And this contrast in attitudes holds throughout each of the novels. The Catcher in the Rye, for those who haven't read it, is the story of an immature teenager who fails to reach maturity. The world described in its pages is populated with phony but civil people who are wholly unwilling to engage with Holden in a genuine manner precisely because their phony civility prohibits it. And as such, Holden finds himself folding into himself, forced to conceal his own true self with bitterness and ultimately insanity. The Rule of the Bone, on the other hand, is a world where civility barely exists. Everyone is on the take. Everyone is their natural, uncivilized selves. In such a world, there are no obvious rules by which to guide one's conduct, and so Bone is forced to piece together his own set of rules. And he does so precisely in the way in which Holden cannot, by making connections with those who are genuine, with those who reveal a natural civility. Now, earlier I mentioned that the bulk of the Rule of the Bone takes place in New England, but there is also a crucial portion which takes place in Jamaica, and it is that portion where a comparison with the Odyssey is most applicable. Here in Jamaica, Bone becomes Telemachus, in search of his father Odysseus, who has never returned home but instead has made a new home, and with a new Penelope, a post-Joycean Penelope, who instead of withholding her love, gives of it freely simply for the asking. It is in this world that Bone finds order, but it is a cruel order, an order built upon sex and drug trafficking, and the rule of whites over blacks. In the end, the security that he finds in this world collapses, but rather than fold in on himself like Holden, or attempt to restore order with himself at the top, as Odysseus does, Bone instead finds order within himself. Of course, with any superb novel concerning a young adult protagonist who tells his own story, the real joy of reading it comes from the narration. And Russell Banks does not fail to give us an impressive voice, a voice which captures Bone's ability to hold a bunch of information together without breaking stride, a talent which helps him survive throughout the novel. Now, we already had a taste of it earlier, but I'll leave you with a more extended passage, so that you know just what kind of joy to expect should you make the wise decision to read Rule of the Bone. Enjoy.